Welcome to the third in our series of 4 virtual conversations on compassionate systems change in higher education. My name is Diana Chapman-Walsh. I'm an advisor to the Center for Systems Awareness at MIT. We want to thank our MIT co-organizers, Open Learning, JWell, the Abdul, Latif, Jameel World Education Lab, and the Comparative Media Studies Writing Department in the School of the Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences. We also want to thank the Carnegie Corporation of New York and the Stewart Foundation for generous support, not only of this series, but of the emerging systems awareness research community in MIT. Thank you so much. So we're on our way with this third webinar to building a research community of leaders in educational innovation, leaders at MIT and partners elsewhere, leaders who are interested in systems and how to make them more humane, more generative, and more compassionate. This is our third, as I said, in the series of 4 webinars, and we're putting a stake in the ground for this community that we'd like to see emerge. The first was in January. We heard from Peter Senge and Meta Bole and Eric Klopfer, one of our partners at MIT, about how this work, their own work, has brought them to this point and what they hope to see emerge from this new collaborative community. We explored a few of the questions and the ideas we'll want to continue to develop as colleagues interested in systems change in education. Our second in February was on equity. How do we define it, study it, and advance it across all levels of society? We had 2 speakers, Michael McAfee from PolicyLink, who talked of public policies designed to lift up the 100 million people, the majority of whom are people of color who live at or near poverty, and Larissa Duncan, who's doing research and intervention designed to bring mindfulness and compassion into parenting and pregnancy, healthy families and schools, and medical settings, so across domains and systems. Today, those themes continue to inform our discussion, and now we focus specifically on population-level data that can help support well-being and change at the level of systems. So we'll take a look at what we're learning and what we might in time learn in this community about the interdependent cultivation of individual and community well-being and all the interstices in between, widening our frame, as last month's speakers did, beyond the inherently individual approach of the mainstream educational enterprise. So now we're introducing the use of rich and informative data to map what we're learning and what we're doing. We have an exciting program today. We have 5 speakers who come from 2 of the most mature and progressive efforts, I think, in the country or the world to answer the simple but neglected question all communities should be asking but rarely do, and that is, how are our children doing? And what can we be doing to create environments in which our children can thrive? The 2 efforts are in British Columbia, which was initiated about 2 decades ago in the 1990s with the leadership of Kimberly Schonert-Reichl, who's here with us. And so first, British Columbia, secondly, in California, across the state of California, in the expanded learning programs that are represented at various levels and in various roles by our other 4 speakers. 2 very large laboratories then, where key colleagues to the center are advancing the kinds of questions that this new collaborative community has in mind to pursue and refine. So I'm going to invite each speaker to very briefly introduce yourselves and take just a minute or so to say a very few words about the essence of your work as it relates to our core questions about using population data to make kids healthier. All the speakers are close colleagues and highly valued contributors to the Center for Compassionate Systems and its ongoing work. And then we'll have a quick word from Meta and Peter on their hopes for this session, and then we'll get into it. So I'll begin with you, Michael Funk. Michael is director of the Expanded Learning Division of the California Department of Education. He's been doing that since early 2012. He's developed and now is in the process of executing a new vision of expanded learning in California. It's massive and it's critically important. They have many stories to tell. I've heard a few of them and there are many more, I'm sure. Michael, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Diane. Yeah, so hello, everyone. Michael Funk, as Diane said, and I've been at the California Department of Education for 10 years. Before that, for nearly 20 years, I was in the community-based organization world in San Francisco, partnering with San Francisco and then Oakland Unified School District. And it's been quite a journey. have some great colleagues here on the call with me. I think the best way to introduce me is to say that a couple things I typically say, which is, especially in California, we're launching now a multi-billion-dollar new expanded learning initiative. In many places with school districts and charter schools that have not been part of expanded learning. Just a word, expanded learning is a choice. It means before school, after school, summer programs, traditionally called by parents as after school. But the very name after school is just a place and a time, and it's just by the name, it separates itself from the school day. And yet we really start from the place that children learn all the time, everywhere, from everyone. And it's not just the certificated teachers that are the instructors, but there's great power when we think of communities and places where learning can be expanded outside of what's taught during the school day. And so expanded learning is bringing together community educators, people from the community who are there to support and love children and help them learn and explore. And that's who we are. I always end my sessions by saying lead with love. And what I mean by that is not the soft stuff. It is, and this is why I was so inspired by Kim's work in British Columbia. For children, the system, the humans in the system need to see, know, support, and prepare every child. Every child should be known. And our data system hasn't been set up to do that. So that's why I'm excited to be part of this conversation. Thanks, Diane.
Thank you very much, Michael. Perfect beginning. And next, Tiffany Gibson, who is Program Director for Equity and Quality Initiatives at the California After School Network, CAN. It's a nonprofit that works closely with this expanded learning program throughout California. Tiffany was a former classroom teacher and it works on all kinds of issues related to equity and access and care and love for children. Tiffany? Could you say a few words about your work?
Good, thank you. I'm Tiffany Gibson, and I have known Michael for a lot of that time because initially we met when I was working with our own nonprofit in Oakland doing the same kind of work. And I think what's really interesting about the conversation we get to have today is Michael gave a really good definition of expanded learning, and expanded learning comes from youth development work, capital Y, capital D, right? And that work is really anchored in the relationships adults and young people have to help young people co-create where they want to go and what they want to do, and understanding that they come to us with everything that they need. So I think being able to look at data that kind of anchors us in what helps and not what we're always trying to fix is going to be important for this next part of the work that we're all trying to do. So excited about the conversation, and thanks for having me.
Thank you. Great. So an orientation towards strengths as opposed to deficits. Yeah, great. Thank you. Let's keep that in mind too. Ernesto Duran is the Ventura County Office of Education is there, and there he directs regional and expanded learning services. He provides technical assistance for expanded learning programs across 4 counties and serves nearly 30,000 students. And Ernesto also has a very fascinating and moving personal story I hope we'll hear at some point. But for now, Ernesto, a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Diana. Data drives our work, but what is the outcome of our work? And it's good to have opportunities to tell the stories, to tell our stories and how they relate to what we do. I've always believed that children thrive when they have stability, when they feel safe, and like Michael said, when they feel loved. And for me, I am a product of expanded learning of after school programs as a student, where I had an opportunity to really polish my English and feel welcome to this amazing country. It was my first job, my first professional job, a big job, and I am although I ventured out into the private sector and the tech world at some point in my life, I came back to education because it was my calling, and not necessarily in front of a classroom, uh, uh, but in a manner where I could fully, um, uh, with my own experiences, give back to the children we serve. And so through expanded learning and the work we do now with compassionate systems at the state level, I am so honored to continue doing this work and continue to support our children. So hopefully there's an opportunity to share a little more, but thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Yes, Ernesto, there will be an opportunity to share more. Next, I want to invite Jenny Schneider to say a few words. She is at the Sonoma County Office of Education in Santa Rosa. She's Deputy Superintendent of the Instructional Services Division there. She's done it all, I think, Jenny. She's been a district superintendent, an elementary school principal, a middle school teacher in the county. She's seen the system from many vantage points and is committed to cultivating ecosystems for deeper learning for every student. So Jenny, a few words from you.
Thank you, Diana, and thank you, everyone. I'm really honored to be here this morning with all of you. And as I think about this topic that we're talking about, student well-being and really centering students, that is certainly from the vantage point of the organization that I work with. We work with educational partners across 40 different school districts, expanded learning programs. And I think our focus really is on how do we lift up and hear student voices. And so as we are thinking about data, and particularly that kind of higher level population data, how do we bring that down to really understand the student experience and understand where, conditions that really allow students to be seen and heard and flourish and really come from that strengths-based approach that Tiffany was talking about. So really delighted to be here and to be a part of this conversation.
Great, thank you. And then Jenny, I'm sorry, Kim, Kim Schonert-Reichl, who has a very large academic footprint. She's one of the world's leading experts, I think, in social and emotional learning and child and adolescent development. She's a professor and research psychologist, currently in an endowed chair at the University of Illinois at Chicago, formerly at the University of British Columbia, where 2 decades ago, she started much of this population work that we're going to be talking about today. So Kim, you're going to get a chunk of time in a minute after I bring Peter and Meta in. But for now, is there some quick thing you'd like to say just to get your voice in the room?
I think it's so just good morning, everyone. Good morning, Diana. So honored to be here with everyone to be part of this conversation. And I guess I just want to say that I've been working for many years, not only as a researcher, but also I began as a teacher in a middle school and as an alternative high school teacher. And it really was that early work with those students who taught me so much about the importance of well-being and the importance of a strengths-based approach. So all of my work was just inspired by them.
Right. Perfect. The students teach the teachers very often. Peter, anything you'd like to say about what you're hoping to see us accomplish in this? I wish we had 3 hours for one thing, but.
Well, first off, in a kind of a totally unplanned bit of synchronicity, or maybe you could say irony, both Meta and I are actually in California right now, visiting all the different expanded learning providers and their partners in school districts and county offices. So it's kind of weird. I'm sure most of you are having experiences or have recently had experiences like, let me see, you got to wear pants now and you got to dress, it's a whole thing. We're out in the world. But the main thought I had listening to the introductions, I mean, this is a wonderful group of people that we know well. This is starting to become a big deal. I mean, probably as you've been listening to the ideas, the guiding kind of principles and kind of why do we do what we do, a lot of it resonates. but it's always been, I would say, amongst a small number of extraordinary people working at the periphery. There's been community-based organizations working with youth and kids at risk for decades. But in California, this is a really big deal. It has been for the last decade plus. California spends more money on expanded learning than the other 49 states combined ×3. And that's not just in the aftermath of COVID. That has been for the last decade or so. In British Columbia, the story that Kim will tell you in a minute is about the province, working province-wide. So to me, we're at a moment now where a lot of these basic ideas and principles that the real school is the life of the child. The real teachers are all the adults in a young person's life, can really start to move into the mainstream at a scale that matters.
Great, thank you. Thank you, really important comment. And just to say, I didn't say anything up front, but we're in the middle of this devastating war. We had a president of Ukraine speak to our Congress yesterday, and he spoke about the children. The thing that is breaking his heart is what's happening to the children in his country. So looking after the children couldn't be more important in the world context either. Meta, did you find a place to sit and talk? Welcome.
I think so. I do hope that you can all hear me now. As Peter shared, I'm on the road for the first time in 2 years, and I feel like a complete rookie with all things. So I am, the pants is one thing, but all the rest of it, the chairs are not as comfortable as my own chair at home and all that. So anyway, so I'm delighted to be here. Thank you all for showing up for this meeting today. The comment about the children, and obviously the children who are suffering from warfare that they had no stake in whatsoever in the first place is of course heartbreaking, I think, to all of us. It doesn't matter where in the world this is happening. We know that the children are never the ones initiating all the turmoil that happens to them. And from this last decade of having this amazing, incredible opportunity to work with so many education partners from so many places in the world, I think it's becoming very clear as we become a more global species that they're really all our children. It's not about just the children that we give birth to or the children that we're kind of related to in a biological sense, but all children deserves adults that really protect them and care for them and takes care of the surroundings that they're in so they can thrive and flourish and grow. And I think that's what we see in California with these amazing partners, many of whom are on the call today, but also on this tour that we have these couple of weeks of just people who are somehow pushing against the system because the structure was not designed to really nourish and care for children. It's much more technical. And the people in the systems, the ones that we get to work with, are pushing against that structure in order to provide care. And what we're looking for is why not recreate the structure so that care is at the very center of it. And that's the conversations that we're all engaging in these couple of weeks. So as you can imagine, it doesn't really matter if my chair is comfortable or not, or if I know how to wear pants, because these are the most important conversations I could imagine being. So thank you all for being here today.
Thank you very much, Meta. There's some background noise. If everyone would please check and mute your speaker, that would be helpful. Thank you, Meta. Beautiful, beautiful comment. Okay, so now Kim, we turn it over to you, and I will just turn it over to you. You know what to do with the time you have.
Thank you so much, and Diana. And just I just have to say, thank you so much for the words about thinking about the children during war and in the Ukraine. It's my heart is breaking. That's all I can say. And I think it's so important. So I'm going to just share a PowerPoint, a few slides that I have. Can you all see that? Thumbs up?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, great. And let me just get this. I have to put my glasses on to get this all going. And I just want to make sure this is okay for the signer. Perfect. Okay, so just in the next few minutes, I'm going to just give you a bit of the British Columbia story. So I will say, so I was at the University of British Columbia for 30 years, from 1991 to 2021. And really at that time, I was in the Faculty of Education, in teacher preparation, as well as education, but also working at the Human Early Learning Partnership for the last 2 decades. But I want to just give you the context of British Columbia. So this is the British Columbia School Act. And if you see the educated citizen, I won't go through all of them, that one of the goals of the BC education system is human and social development. And if anyone's ever heard of that, John Dewey, he also mentioned that as an important goal of education more than a century ago. British Columbia also redid their education curriculum about several years ago to have the aim of the K-12 curriculum to include not only cognitive and communication, but also personal and social competency. So they really, an intentional part of the entire education system is having outcomes related to personal and social responsibility. So things like solving problems in peaceful ways, self-regulation, and well-being at the heart of that. So just so you see the context of British Columbia and how they developed the population system, it's really in a larger system that is policy directed from the K-12 system. So now I'm going to just tell a little bit about the Human Early Learning Partnership. So the Human Early Learning Partnership, as it says here, is an interdisciplinary research institute. It's in the Faculty of Medicine at the University of British Columbia, but it draws faculty from many different places. And it really is someplace that brings in researchers and community members, all from both within inside the university, but around the university. And we even have an Aboriginal steering committee that helps direct it. But the vision of HELP is all children thriving in healthy societies. And so one thing that happened about 20 years ago is the importance of measuring and monitoring the social and emotional competence and well-being of children in British Columbia at the population level, at the entire population, all children. And so a framework was set up to try and think about different parts, different developmental periods in which to capture data on how children are doing. That question, how are the children? So there's the toddler development instrument that's being developed, the childhood experiences questionnaire for kindergarten children, the early development instrument, which I'll go into a little bit more, the middle years development instrument, which is now 4th to 8th grade, and then the youth development instrument. And note that a lot of this work is funded by a partnership with the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Children and Family Development, as well as the Ministry of Health. And I also want to say that HELP, although I've been a part of it for over 20 years, it was founded by Dr. Clyde Hertzman, who was an MD epidemiologist. It was really Clyde's really brainchild of doing this monitoring system. So let me just do a little pin into the early development instrument. So the early development instrument is a population level measure of children in kindergarten as they enter school on these 5 dimensions: physical health and well-being, social competence, emotional maturity, language and cognitive development, and communication skills. And what happens is, since 2001, is that every 3 years, kindergarten teachers complete a measure on each of their children on these 5 dimensions, a measure, the EDI. And then what happens after that is that in this wave, that school districts across the entire province, because they have data on every single kindergarten child, is that they can map the percentage of children in each district or community. It can be done by neighborhood using this GIS mapping. And so what you see here is data that reflect the percentage of children who are vulnerable as indexed by the EDI, who fall below a certain criteria for that. So think about this snapshot. So right away, you could go and look at this map and see, where are the greatest number of vulnerable children in the province? Where are the least number of vulnerable children? So you look at that white spot. I know you're all kind of looking, why is that white spot? What happened? Why are there no vulnerable children there? That's Revelstoke. And that's a really interesting story of what happened. What were the essential ingredients? But what's so fascinating here, it doesn't map onto just closely socioeconomic status. There are some communities with a high number of vulnerable children who have very high socioeconomic status. And there's also communities that have low SES, but yet have high, low vulnerability. So that's a way to start looking at these and start asking these questions. And then, as you can see here, because it's collected every 3 years, you can actually monitor children's well-being in kindergarten on these 5 dimensions and look at that. What's been most fascinating, and I just wonder what your experience is the parts in which there's been the greatest increase in child vulnerability, social competence, and emotional maturity over the last decade. Why? I'm just raising that question to consider. And the next measure that I'm going to talk about is the MDI, or Middle Years Development Instrument. And this is one that I really was the lead on developing about 15 years ago. And as I mentioned before, my background is really as a teacher and how much my students could teach me. So this is really a student voice measure, 4th to 8th grade, on children's well-being. And in fact, when we developed it in collaboration with a number of stakeholders, but also children, we told them they're our teachers. We need to learn from them. The MDI is also strengths-based as opposed to the EDI that uses a vulnerability index. We actually have a strengths-based index, and it's about children's lives both inside and outside of school. So it's the entire context, which is really important because it looks at things like the connection, students' perceptions of connection to adults in their neighborhoods, how they spend their after-school time, their friends, and their families. And so it's both their school experiences and outside, as well as social and emotional competence. We have an index of well-being. Again, how we had an index of vulnerability for the EDI, for the MDI, we have an index of well-being. And so it really looks at what percentage of kids are thriving, medium to high well-being, and low well-being on these 5 dimensions. It's a composite of optimism, self-esteem, happiness, absence of sadness, and general health. And the MDI has been being implemented across British Columbia since 2010. And this year, last week, we completed our data collection for children across the province, collected data on 50,000 children in which we'll be doing reports. We also have an assets index because it's not just about how children are doing, but what are those levers of change that are actually actionable and malleable. And we have these 4 dimensions of adult relationships, nutrition and sleep, as well as peer relationships and after-school activities. We have a number of reports. We have spent many, many years developing these reports in terms of infographics and maps for the MDI as well. I'm not going to go into those, but just show you, here's one map, for instance. So here's a school district, the largest one in British Columbia, called Surrey. This is a map of well-being. So you could right away look at, in one school district, all of the neighborhoods across that district to see which percentage of children have the highest well-being and which have the lowest well-being. So here, the darker color means higher rates of well-being or thriving. So the green represents thriving, so darker colors, and then lighter colors mean lower levels of thriving. So can you imagine presenting this to a group of community members, of educators, the mayor, social planning, all of those sitting and looking at how are the kids doing and what's happening in those neighborhoods in which they're thriving and what's happening in those neighborhoods where there's lower well-being. We map every dimension of the MDI. This is, again, another snapshot of adult relationships. And just to remind you, what we did for adult relationships, that asset is how supported the children feel by adults at home, at school, and in the community, in the neighborhood. And so right here, you could start looking at which neighborhoods across this school district, again, of Surrey, feel the most connected to the adults and which are their lower levels. Don't you all want to go see what's happening in that one down there? What's happening in this dark one? And again, it's not just about socioeconomic status. It's a number of different factors. And it's so important that these maps have been so catalytic in terms of people understanding the data at the system level in such a short, everyone can get it. Can I just say the maps are so easily understandable? So I'm going to end with just a few things about going forward, what we've learned in this past decade or 2 decades, really, about moving forward from data to action, how data have really been a catalyst for so many things. It really is the data that instigated the focus on well-being, I have to say, across the province. It was the data that instigated the policy changes to include a focus on well-being. It was the data, and it's so funny because data some way feels kind of cold and oh, you get the data, but it has been transformative. We really spend a lot of time sharing data in ways that are understandable by all. We even have a kids advisory group of how we interpret the data for the kids, but for school boards, community agencies, parents and caregivers, we use the data. The data have been the spark for how are the kids doing? You know, it really has been, it's the data brings everyone together to say, what's the well-being? What are the assets that we're providing in our communities? It also has been a way to bring in because all people have a stake in children's well-being, not just in the school, but it's been really a way to bring together so many, like I said, social planners for the community to look at where the neighborhoods are, mayors, you know, everyone in the community, boys and girls clubs, everyone as well. And it's always been important to talk about the context. So it's then sort of helped the data. Now we look at those maps in those neighborhoods, what's been happening in that area, what could be happening. I have to say one of the things that really has been so important for me is going to present the data to communities and them teaching me, helping them make meaning of their data. There's so many things that I can't interpret, but when you go there and they'll say, oh, the reason that well-being, well, that's the year that, you know, up north, that's when the factory closed and all the, or that's when we had wildfires there, or that's when, you know, so they provide that context as well. And then I want to end just with a quote, because I just really love this quote. And I think it's so meaningful here. It's how you engage everyone in the conversation. So some of you might have heard of Seymour Saracen, a professor at Yale, called I believe he's been described as an optimistic curmudgeon, which I really love that description. And really he says, to the extent that the effort at change identifies and meaningfully involves all those who directly or indirectly will be affected by the change, to that extent, the effort stands a chance to be successful. So I'm going to end there with Seymour, just really reiterating how important it is to bring everyone into the conversation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. That's exactly what we were hoping for. So I will now turn it to Michael Funk. Michael, inviting you to describe your work with expanded learning, your vision, your dreams for expanded learning in California, this very big mandate you've got, and in the context of what we've just heard from Kim. Anything you want to say?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Well, I feel like I'm at like the parking lot with about 5 trails I could go.
Exactly.
You know, right. But I actually want to start with a question for Kim. Kim, one of the things that struck me by your work and your story several years ago was that if you overlay the map of well-being on top of the map of strictly measuring how children measure up to academic standards, they don't necessarily always match up. The ones that show up as being behind in terms of academic standards might not be behind in the well-being. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question. Thank you, Michael. I think what we know is for children to be, so for one thing, schooling is just one aspect of a child's life. That idea of how those academic grades are, it might not represent their whole self. So if you have a child who's not doing well academically, but they are thriving in terms of they are connected to friends, they feel supported by adults, they are involved in after-school activities and are like a great soccer player, that doesn't mean there's a one-to-one correspondence between the academics. So I think so it's just really important to say that what kind of skills do we want of our citizens of tomorrow? You know, and what we know more and more now from the research, it's not your academic achievement that predicts your life success. It's these other skills like being able to get along with each other, being happy, being able to persevere. Those are the things that lead to success. So that's really what in my eyes, that's kind of what's been so important.
Thank you, Kim. Excuse me. And that's, you know, I work at the California State Department of Education. but I'm not an expert in assessment and evaluation. So that's why I posed that question back to you as opposed to inserting my opinion. Because I think it's so essential that as a lifelong youth worker, and Tiffany mentioned the capital Y, capital B, the field of youth development is a field that actually emerged with research in the early 90s, which along with the field of community development, started to look at assets in communities and in humans versus just look at the deficits. It's about a time when public funding started to shift from crime prevention, drug prevention, pregnancy prevention, gang reduction, to looking at assets and how do we build these strengths. And with this notion that if we provide humans, especially young people, with the right supports and opportunities, that they will grow into their best selves. And so that's, Tiffany and I, and that's the universe we grew up in. And we were always in partnership and in dialogue with the school district that was kind of caught up in No Child Left Behind and was dialed into what the test scores were, and the measurement of success for the school was entirely about the test scores. And yet we knew that, it's important to know that Maria is struggling with reading. And she, we all know that being able to read is such a key to navigating life in general. So that the system is pretty good at knowing what level Maria can read at or can't read at, but not very good at knowing why. And in some cases, we have fascinating, Janice Lorenzo's on here. We were at a fascinating site visit yesterday with Meta and Peter in the far north in Humboldt, and there was a principal who was training all of her teachers in this elementary school to understand the neuroscience behind what the ability of kids to learn how to read. Well, because it's very complex, it's very deep. And she said to me, learning to read is not a natural evolutionary developed function. Learning to speak is, learning to read isn't. There's actually, our brains have to be rewired to do this. Well, that's okay. So there's a good science behind that. And we have to have people who are trained, because some kids can't learn to read better just by reading more. There has to be some keys to unlock. But what about the conditions that the child came from that morning? What about some kind of disruption or trauma in the child's life? That even with the ability to try to unlock the neuroscience of how to help that child read, there needs to be the social emotional support. And someone has to know that child well enough to understand all of it. And so with that, I want to pivot to, Peter said California's got more state funding for expanded learning than all 49 states combined ×3. Well, that was before last year. That was when we had $650 million of state funding. Well, it's proposed to go to 4.4 billion next year. So it is ramping up. And I'm on a mission to help people understand the opportunity that's here with them. And that opportunity looks like this. During the pandemic, when we closed schools and districts started to bring students, vulnerable students, back into learning hubs, they also brought in those expanded learning workers, the community educators, as we call them, who tend to be from the community, who tend to know the families. And when the school district lost track of a student and lost contact with the family, it was the expanded learning folks who, by and large, oh, I know that family. I'll walk over to their house, knock on the door. And the community educators tended to look like the family. And so all of a sudden we had in the same space those trained, certificated school teachers who understood the keys to unlocking the academic precision, like those reading secrets of neuroscience, and the specialists working alongside the youth worker that looked like the student and was from the same neighborhood, and the combination of the child feeling deeply supported in relationship, along with the person who's deeply trained academically, was stunning and magical. And in fact, California has a study called in the Summer Matters campaign going back almost 10 years, studied by the American Institute for Research. There was an intentionality of putting certificated teachers and after school expanded learning workers together to develop a summer learning experience that was more like summer school and summer camp combined. So you had the best of academics that would help the child progress academically, and you had the most amazing fun program that a child never wanted to miss, didn't want to miss a day. And so it's that combination of the two, the diversity of the workforce, that I think is part of surrounding a child with the kind of supports and opportunities. So when we say supports and opportunities, it's both of those things. Diane, I feel like I could go on another trail, but I'm going to pause there to allow the voices of our other folks in.
Okay, very good. So why don't we just go, Ernesto, why don't I ask you, you've now seen Kim's data. I'm sure you've seen it before, but in the context now of this remarkable opportunity and responsibility, I hear Michael saying that you in California have with these resources to really light the way for education everywhere. What would you like to ask of Kim, or say to Kim, or ask yourself about?
Kim, Diana, I think Kim has obviously confirmed something or mentioned something that I truly believe, because it connects to my own story, my own journey in education, and as a child and as an adult, is that academic achievement does not determine whether a person is going to thrive in society. And for me, it was that's the case. I mean, we were talking just earlier about reading, and I didn't learn to read until I was 12 years old, and that's because I was a product of a broken home, and I learned survival skills before I learned to read and write, growing up in Mexico City, and that was more important then, finding a way to eat and a way to stay safe, and there was lack of love. And those are all the things that we provide to children in a stable society, right? In a loving society. But those things are key in a child that needs resources, that is not very connected to our system, and the most at risk. So the system isn't designed currently to adapt to children and families. It's the other way around. It's designed for families and children to adapt. So in an era of crisis during the pandemic, we see children having to take care of their families, having to take care of mom and dad, being left alone at home, having to figure out how they're gonna go about their day, and so academics comes at the end. It's the survival, it's the crisis that we're dealing with right now, and so that's the case of my own growth. I grew up in crisis, and so therefore I had to learn all these other skills before I came to the U.S. and found the stability, the love and the safety that I was looking for. So I found food, I found shelter, I found that I didn't have to look over my back anymore. And then I found the love, right, from all my teachers and my family here. So, I just make that connection because it's very true. And I always talk about this, that we can have thriving children, but without all those developmental assets, it's almost impossible. So if I'm able to thrive academically and go to a reputable university at some point in my life, well, what happened, right, in that process, and what do we need to do for kids? Because those basic elements are key in providing children with a solid foundation. So
Thank you. It's an inspiring story. It's an important story. And part of what's important about it is that you did go on. You are an educator, a highly educated educator. You went on and developed the academic skills, but first you had to be stabilized and have the love and the care that made that possible for you. It's not either or, it's both and, but it's partly about timing. Tiffany, youth development, you're the expert. Let's hear from you. What would you like to say, add it to the conversation, ask Kim, tell us about your own.
Well, I think it's a
philosophy.
couple of things, right? That I youth develop. So I was a classroom teacher, so I should start with that. And then I became a counselor. And what I kept having to acknowledge is what I was being asked to do as a classroom teacher was not resulting in the kind of success that I wanted for my students. Now, that doesn't mean that I wasn't doing really important things, but it wasn't manifesting for them in ways that was helping them in those moments, right? So it became this conversation around relevance. And I think like that's what Kim's data made me kind of reflect on, right? The fact that I was able to look at students on an individual level every day. And I was able to see them for what was happening when they came into this space, and understanding that there were days when whatever I was going to teach was really not going to land, because like her, I worked at a continuation school. So my young people came into childlike spaces with adult problems, right? So a lot of that forced me to start saying, well, how do I help them manage those adult issues that they shouldn't have, but that they do? And then embed in that this learning, that this academic kind of learning that needs to happen. So that kind of balance, and it didn't necessarily, the way that my classroom was structured didn't create space for that. So I worked with my first principal and I was like, can I keep some people after school? He was like, yeah, I don't care. You do what you want to after school. He's like, that has no bearing on us. And I was like, okay. I said, well, can you like give me some food? Like, can you buy some pizzas? Can you do something so that I can, you know, create the conditions that make it easier for them to stay? And he was like, yep, I can do that. And that was literally like, and I'd done tutoring in some after school programs when I was in college, but this was the first time when I looked at it as a strategy, right? Like I was able to keep them safer, longer, but now we were able to talk about things that were relevant to them that they elevated into the conversation, right? So to me, that was the beginning of me really starting to do my own kind of research on, well, what is like the stuff that I'm doing, does it have a name? And it did. It was the whole youth development framework, and it was understanding those principles, and it was about building competency and character and creating opportunities for young people. It was building community. It was all of these things, right? Translating that to like decades later now, and still realizing that, and I liked how when Michael was talking, it's not an either or with youth development practitioners and classroom teachers. Everyone is needed to support young people where they are. But the work around creating caring spaces and building relationships with caring adults, like all of that, it isn't elevated as much in our traditional academic settings. And that is the push that I think some of Kim's data would allow us to start having the conversations about, right? Because just because someone isn't excelling in an academic measure that they did not choose, it doesn't mean that they aren't doing well and thriving in other spaces, right? And so how do we take, there's an amazing person that does some work. She started doing a lot of stuff in the Bay Area. It's grown over. Tia Martinez, and it's called the Life Course Framework, and they kind of plot the whole school to prison pipeline, and we're using that data to kind of build an assets-based model to how do you interrupt that. And one of the things that she said in a training once was that this is the data that bleeds, so never lose sight of that. That framing alone helped us redefine, when we use this data, what was so important about it, right? Like Kim also said, the relevance of context of data, right? And what that really means is, how do we decolonize data,
Mm, mm.
right? So being able to look at those things, I think is what, and after she showed us the data the first time, right, and we looked at the different index, and the minute we got to the assets based one, I was like, oh my gosh, like where has this been? And thanks to Peter and Meadow, it was also, we were in our cohort, and so I was able to like literally get on a call with some of the BC folks afterwards and say, okay, how did this work? What came from this, right? What did you learn from this? And what I think is beautiful about how we're going to be able to do something, I think, in California with this is, and it wasn't all perfect, right? There were great things that they learned, but there were also lessons that they learned, and we can apply it for, we can apply those now. We can be sure that our indigenous people here are included in those conversations at the beginning. We can ensure that our most disenfranchised folks have helped define what the measures are, that when we say well-being, what does that really look like and mean for them? So I'm excited for the opportunity. I think we've got the opportunity. Our system was broken. COVID helped everyone else see it. And now we can actually redesign it with the people most impacted and affected by it. And I think that's my optimism at play.
It's great. It's a great vision. It's more than just optimism. We can see it coming to pass. Thank you. That's beautiful. So Jenny, let's hear from you and how you build on what your colleagues have had to say. And
absolutely. Just so, at the outset of this session this morning, Diana, you mentioned really the purpose of this work is really looking at how do we create systems that are more humane, generative, and compassionate. And as I've been listening to this incredible panel and the work that Kim has done and my colleagues across the state of California are doing, that to me is at the heart of this work. And just to provide a little context for, my local context in Sonoma County, we have, the children in our community have experienced waves of wildfires, displacements, in addition to, COVID and so forth. And so this issue of student well-being is front and center, and thinking about not just children as they are in their homes or in communities, but how do we create these humane, generative, and compassionate school communities. One of the things that I've seen kind of develop over the last several years, and I think Michael spoke to this very beautifully, was this, I'm seeing sort of the walls sort of little cracks in the fissures of the walls that used to separate the school day and the after school and the teachers and the various, the people that work in the community. During the pandemic here in Sonoma County, the folks that worked in expanded learning, like they were delivering food. They were instrumental to really that connective tissue with families and communities. And so, I really see the possibility in folks working across the system. One of the things, just a couple things that I want to raise up is, during the pandemic, we used a kind of a survey tool to really hear from the voices of young people. And one of the most startling sort of data points that jumped out was, kids were asked, what was the largest barrier to you in your learning during this pandemic? 70% of the young people in Sonoma County said that the greatest barrier to their learning was anxiety about their future. Mm-hmm. I just want to kind of sit with that. I mean, that knocked everybody. So as we think about that anxiety about what does my future hold? Do I have hope? Do I have a sense of, what is possible? To me, that is a call to action. I mean, that is really, I think that underlying frame for the work that Kim has done and is doing. The other piece that I would raise up is, we definitely, I think, focusing on young people and how the various adults, all the teachers, the real teachers across the system are working with students. And oftentimes the adults who work in the system or outside the system have their own experience of what that system is like, right? And so much of the work that our team does here from the county office is how do we create the conditions for the adults in the system to really have a taste for attending to their own needs, creating that safety for them to be vulnerable, to question their assumptions, to so I really see that this work is, we talk about it being a system, and it very much is, but we creating those conditions for all humans in the system to really be safe and so that they're able to create those conditions for kids. So we're all connected in this work. And I'm just really grateful to be here this morning. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So you've really brought in at least two more critical themes. One is climate change, the whole environment. You mentioned the fires, but we're all wondering about the future, adults and
Yes.
children, and it is anxiogenic in all kinds of ways for everyone, and we need to be together in that. And also the point you made about during COVID, people were doing all kinds of jobs, the notion of essential workers. We've completely reframed our thinking about what's essential work and who are the essential workers. And what you're saying is everybody's essential, and everybody needs to be healthy and needs to be seen and supported. It's beautiful, beautiful points. Great. So little time to bring in Peter and Meta, just to put whatever kind of a capstone on it you'd like to do, and then we'll go into our breakout group. So Peter, do you want to start?
Well, I don't really want to try to add too much. And when you have this kind of extraordinary tapestry of experiences and depth of understanding, it's in some ways you've got to kind of ponder and just hold the tapestry. There is a real beauty. And I'll just kind of restate what I said at the beginning, in the sense that now could be the time. I mean, this time will tell, as they say. But as Tiffany was saying, if there's ever a time when the education system is really kind of fallen apart, and the ones who are going to get to the lifeboats quickest are mostly the ones who have a lot of resources at their disposal, and yet our society as a whole hinges on the well-being of the whole. That's what makes a society work or not. If there's ever a time to really question deep assumptions, this is it. And again, the scale of accomplishment that's already been achieved in California and BC means that there's a way that could go really start to become more and more influential in the mainstream.
Very inspiring. Meta.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank everyone, all our wonderful panelists, or whatever we call you, my dear colleagues and friends, with whom I'm just so immensely proud and grateful that I have the opportunity to work with, because I think it kind of speaks for itself. There's so many reports from local settings of why we need to focus differently, focus our attention differently, and how we have been able to do so, and some of the outcomes that has produced. And my main concern is that these things should have never been politicized. This should have never been up to, if you belong to a particular political stance, or if you have a particular, religious orientation, or you have a particular ethnic background or whatever. This is for people in society, and we as human beings in the communities and in the societies have a shared responsibility that we can create these spaces, as we call them, the social field, the general social fields for our kids to grow up in. And as Peter says, it concerns everyone. And the idea that it's better for me and my kids if you over there do not have access to resources and are not safe and secure and well helped is a very, very toxic belief system, the kind of the whole zero-sum game. And we're up against that in some ways. And I think right now we have the opportunity to see that it isn't actually serving us at all, because we've
Thank you. Thank you very
pandemic
much.
and experienced firsthand what interconnectedness is.
Yeah, thank you, Meta. So Kim has to go. I think she's got to go teach a course or something. I want us to just have a minute to thank you, Kim, so very much, not just for what you've done for us this morning, which was terrific, but also for what you're doing for
Thank
all
you.
of us.
Well, it's
Really.
just such a pleasure. And please, if anyone wants to contact me, I know Peter has something up on the Center for System Awareness. I think Lana was going to put a link on the help story, but please, if anyone needs to reach out and wants to know more, I'm here. And I'm just, again, so honored. I could have this conversation go on for a few more hours, just so you know.
We all could.
And I hope we can. So
Yeah.
you have to sign off, but just wishing everyone a wonderful day.
Maybe another time in the new lab, once it's up and going, we'll get you back for a
Oh,
day.
for sure. Count me in. Anything.
All right, terrific. Be well.
Thank
Have a
you,
good day.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Take care. Great. So now, and I think our California friends can stay. I'm hoping that's true. If not, if you have to drop off, please do. And of course, everybody's in California practically with Peter and Meta there. So let's do our check-ins, because we always do, and it's always valuable. So your journaling question is, how do these themes and questions relate to your own work? As usual, that's nothing new. And you know the protocol. So you ask, you'll be put in a small group. First, go around the circle and hear from each person without responding. Give every person a chance to just bring him or herself into the circle. Slow down and give people a chance to digest that. And that's brief. And then you can have a chance to make a longer comment, a bit longer, from your journaling. And if you limit all of that to 2 or 3 minutes, you'll have 5 minutes for a joint exploration of what's come up from it. So then we'll bring you back here to the plenary group, and I'll invite anybody who has something to say from the group to do so, if there's, insofar as we have time to do that. So whoever is in charge of getting us into our breakout groups, now's the moment. And thank you, Lana. Welcome back from your groups, from your breakout groups. I hope the conversations went well. Now I'm going to invite you, anyone who chooses to, and if you would put up your hand, your Zoom hand or your real hand, the Zoom hand is probably better for us if you want to speak. So I'm inviting you to share a question or a theme that might have emerged from your check-in. And I will call people in the order that I see them. So I see Roger Hackett first. Roger?
Hi, yes, I'm working in foundational literacy, and I was just very curious as to whether or not anyone has done systems mapping of, so the communities, kind of like the data that you showed us, but more around sort of the feedback loops, the positive feedback loops, the negative feedback loops, and just understanding more of that. And then I guess going beyond sort of the really foundational parts of literacy, I heard about the school to prison pipeline. I would love to know if anyone's done any of that kind of system mapping as well.
Great. Okay, we'll just hold that for a minute, and I'll keep calling on people to bring whatever they want to bring from their groups, and then we'll see if we can get a chance to get a response to you. Alan Crawford, you're next.
Hi, this question that surfaced from our group was, what does it mean to focus on our attention on something besides academic learning? And it's a simple question with, I think, a lot of implications. For me, what resonated a lot was that even as a subset of that, often the dominant mental model around curriculum is rigor. How rigorous is it? I work as a principal at an alternative education school in Northern California. We help students recover classes that they failed. Shout out to Tiffany. We have a continuation school as well. I loved what you said about the child space and adult problems, but our teachers struggle with how rigorous should the curriculum be. And I'm lucky enough to have a coach from the Center of Systems Awareness, and we were exploring this question. And essentially where we landed was, what if people asked how much love, connection, and attention to well-being is in the curriculum and not how much rigor, right? And it's not either students learn or we're focused on well-being. And I think to come back to that question, it means a lot to focus on things other than academic learning and to bring other parts in that. And so this dialogue has inspired me to continue to focus on, again, how much love, connection, and attention to well-being is in our curriculum, particularly when we're working with students that have been failed by our system.
Thank you. Very thoughtful. That tension exists between the academic mission and the human mission, and to try to keep that in balance is a challenge. That's a great point. Anybody else have anything from that came up in your group, an insight? thought, a question, a worry, a hope?
And one of the things that came up in our group, we were talking a lot about the data and the beautiful way that the data that Kim shared was visualized, and talking about the importance of the conversation she initiated around, you have the context for the data, you understand how to interpret this, so you're coming with the importance of data, but sharing it in a way that it's in partnership rather than in judgment. And where all the energy goes into, how do I visualize this data in a way that the widest community can interpret it and give insight, rather than I come to you having to tell you about my wonderful insights about your data when I don't have your context. And it was just such a beautiful switch.
Thank you. Yes, that's a great point. We had a little group and we also spoke about that, this issue of sharing in partnership rather than judgment. That's beautifully put. Bobby McDonald.
Yeah, I think I can actually build on that. In our group, one of the things that seemed to resonate among all of us was the idea of the powerful story that the data can tell us, but the need for local solutions, local making meaning of that data. And then also just the expansion of what data do we really care about? You know, and if we're creating places where every child can be known, loved, and inspired, what would we measure? And what patterns could we see over time that would tell us that we're on the right path? Those were some of the things that came up.
Great points. You know, the questions you raise and the questions you live your way into the answers eventually if you ask the right questions. Anybody else?
I'll just make a quick kind of information. It's just it's probably a convenient time to put it in now. You'll have a link to an article on the evolution of the BC work, just as a broad kind of introduction. At their website, the UBC website, which you'll see in the article, of course, and the help website, but you can just Google UBC help, Human Early Learning Partnership. You can get access to much more technical material. Obviously, there's a ton of work for 20 years, but so you have access to both.
Thank you. Great. Anything else? Good. Laura Lopez
Yeah.
Ortiz.
Yeah, I'm sorry. In my emojis, I clicked the wrong one. When Kim left, she said that I don't know, that we can contact her. Could you provide her email address or the information that she left to contact? I really would like to know more about her work and understand more about the way that she's obtaining this data.
Good. And as Peter just said, there's a wonderful write-up. I read it. He sent it to me, and I read it in anticipation of this session. It's beautifully written. It's very accessible. It describes the whole long story about how this happened, this development of this program, with the acronym is HELP, H-E-L-P. It stands for something longer, but so you might want to read that before you reach out to her, just so you have a background.
Yeah, guys, if you can send that, that will be so. I will appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Great. Yes. And Ryan.
Is there any thought of continuing this conversation that happened today?
So Peter.
This I can. Oh, sorry, Peter.
Oh, Meta, you want to jump in?
Is my audio good enough here?
Yeah, it's fine. You're fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So the idea with the conversations, the series of webinars that we have, monthly webinars, are all streams or facets of the work that we will. So we've had the opportunity to work with this compassionate systems framework and working with systems change in education for about 10 years. And we're ready to really develop a rigorous approach to research, particularly in the work in California, because it's so advanced here and we have so many partners involved. So yes, this conversation will certainly continue and really feed into the foundations of how we want to approach this. And I think what Roger, the first question as well, do you have systems mapping of this? No, we actually don't. And that has been a kind of a long-term question for me as well. What would happen if we actually begin to apply a more explicit systems understanding of those types of data sets as well, and infuse it with, you know, the perspective of care and compassion and nurturing the children. So all of those elements are the things that we're looking to build our research approach around. So thank you for asking this question.
Okay, good.
Good, great. Thank you for answering the question.
Dan, I just want to acknowledge that there, as I look across the squares on the screen, there's a lot of amazing leaders here in this call that could contribute so much. I'm thinking of seeing Nancy, the superintendent for California School for the Deaf Riverside, who's also a master practitioner in the current cohort. I'm seeing folks from our system of support for expanded learning. I'll miss some, but I see Bessie and Danielle, all deeply rooted in the compassionate systems framework and belief and committed. This is a conversation that is ongoing, and I just humbly ask that each one of you find a way to initiate this conversation in your circles, because it needs to be a conversation that we have, and it's not going to be a quick change. It's going to be something that we should all be thinking about and talking about. So I hope that you'll carry that, and as some have said in the chat, use this video to maybe be a catalyst for local conversation.
Beautiful. Thank you, Michael. That's a perfect benediction. We should leave it there, but just with thanks, deep thanks to you and to Tiffany and Ernesto and Jenny and all of your colleagues in California. And of course, to Meta and Peter, who are here in California with us. I think the possibilities in California are really quite thrilling. And also, obviously, for those of you carrying the responsibility, quite daunting. So we are with you, and thank you deeply for what you're doing for kids. I think that's the end of our time. Next time, our next session is all about kids, so that'll be fun. The next session is called Youth Leading Systems Change for Climate Action. It's scheduled for April 21st. And as we said, and Anne, thank you for your question. As we said, this is what we're trying to do here is to create an ongoing conversation, a laboratory or some sort of a vehicle, a community of concern and caring, of mutual concern about how to create systems that produce results that everyone wants instead of the ones that nobody wants. Mm-hmm. So to be continued, and thank you all for being with us today. And really a great session. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Diana, for your help in shepherding all this. It really is, it's essential to hear as many voices as we can. And of course, it makes it really challenging to create a coherent conversation in an hour and a half virtually. And really appreciate it. You will get access to the recording of this. So as one kind of artifact, one of the reasons for doing this, one of the things to really love about doing these on Zoom is we get a recording. You'll get access to that. Len, it's usually about a week or week and a half, right? And please feel free to use it, as you look for ways to continue the conversation in your communities.
And yeah, next time, as Diana said, I really want to highlight this. There will be real students in the call next time,
including your son. We should add.
I don't think we do that publicly, though, Diana.
Well, we just did.
Yeah,
and he's a superstar.
Yeah, he's our youth leader for the whole framework here, and has worked with student ambassadors from many places in the world, and several of them will be on the call next time. And it's always just so refreshing hearing from the young people themselves.
That's great.
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you, everyone.